is this lost art of giving da'wah. You know, a lot of times we find ourselves scrolling up these videos on YouTube and on Instagram, watching some nice comebacks, right, in Dawah, Speaker's Corner back in UK, and we see Dawah at its best, but we also see Dawah at its worst, right? We see how, I think we were all exposed to how Dawah should go and how Dawah should not go. But the problem is we don't know whether what we're looking at is the proper way to give Dawah. Just because a person won an argument does not mean that they won a heart and that they conveyed a message and that they delivered what they should be delivering as Muslims. So inshallah ta'ala, today Sheikh Fahad is going to shed light on this lost art. Sheikh Fahad Tasleem, he came and joined our community in multiple programs in the past. He is more, you know, he's closer to us than to need a lengthy introduction. We all, alhamdulillah, benefit from his works and his research, alhamdulillah, his extensive research in so many different fields in Islam, alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. But today we're going to explore the field of getting, the art of giving da'wah bi'idhnillah azza wa jal. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us all du'at fi sabilillah and increase us in wisdom and in knowledge so that we may deliver the message. Sisters, inshallah, you're encouraged to come forward. If you want to ask questions, definitely do come forward so that the Shaykh can see you when you raise your hand and ask a question. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. Shaykh Fahad, without further ado.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulih al-Kareem amma ba'd. So, inshallah, where I wanted to start with tonight was a certain experience that I had. And this experience is one that I don't think I will probably ever have again, and maybe others might not have it. So when I was studying at UT Austin, I was studying there in the Middle Eastern Studies department. And one day in the middle of the semester, I get a call from our CEO at the time, Hamza Zortzis. I'm sure some of you might have heard of him. Some people know about him. Anyway, so he calls and he says, Fahad, you need to jump on a plane tomorrow and head to New Zealand. So I'm thinking, man, I'm in the middle of my semester. I've got assignments. Like, you want me to just, he goes, no, it's important. You know, after everything that's happened there, we need to have a presence there. Okay, so now what is he referring to? This was the time of which there was the shootings at Christchurch, for those of you who remember. So if you remember, a shooter had gone in, shot up 2 masjids, not just one, 2 masjids, while people were praying Jum'ah, Salatul Jum'ah. And what had happened was that after all of this had happened, many people had passed away, a lot of Muslims, there was a lot of trauma. A lot of the population in New Zealand really took this to heart. And I'm talking about non-Muslim population. How could such an event happen in our country? So what resulted from that is that people wanted to come to the masjid and offer condolences. They wanted to learn about Islam. And so the reason why Hamza had called, he said, right now we are getting reports that we have at least 500 people a day that are visiting the masjid. And the issue is that if you've just lost a loved one, you are not in dawah mode. You're not, if you lose your son and someone says, okay, let's go make some dawah, you're not going to be like, yes, let's do it. So there was a severe, you can say, shortage. So myself, and for those of you who know Imam Anwar Arafat, I think he may have visited here, we jumped on a plane and we headed to New Zealand. And sure enough, it was like we had heard. We would get up at Fajr, and there'd be people waiting outside the masjid at Fajr, waiting to come in, waiting to offer their condolences, waiting to know about Islam, and all of this. And we would basically be speaking to people from the time of Fajr all the way past Isha, all the way to like 11 or 12 at night. And at that time, we just, we needed a break, basically. But what was interesting about that experience, or what I learned from that experience, is that our understanding of how dawah works is quite skewed. Because when we think about dawah, especially nowadays, Sheikh Murad just mentioned, a lot of our understanding of how da'wah works is informed by YouTube videos, specifically Speaker's Corner. So you see a certain speaker on there and he goes and he decimates his opponent. You're like, yeah, that's what's up, right? But the reality is that sort of aspect of da'wah is a very, very small part of calling someone to Islam. In fact, I would say if you were to, look at this as a percentage, it may be maybe 10%. Whereas most people think it is like 99% of how da'wah is done. And what New Zealand did, what Christchurch did, was bring that to the fore. I can't tell you how many people accepted Islam in that duration. That people would walk into the masjid. Now, you're looking at your masjid here. You've got the carpets. You've got the paint. The paint is solid. You've got the mihrab here, and everything looks good. What sort of structure were the people at that time walking into? They're walking into walls that have like paper plastered all over it, because of the bullet holes and things like that. Paper that's on the windows because the windows were shot through. The carpet has been taken out because the blood stains have to be cleaned off of it. All they're walking into is not a beautiful masjid like this, right? Allahumma barik. But what they're walking into is literally like an empty space. But something about that empty space distinguished it from other empty spaces, where people would walk in and it wouldn't be about, tell me about Islam, it would be about, there's something different about this space. Something that I feel that I've never felt before. And it's one of the aspects that I saw this more than once. People would come in, it's like, they may have come in with some sort of expectation. Like maybe they're used to going to church. And in church you have seats, you have a pulpit, you have, and you have a lot of, let's say, ostentation, right? You've got a lot of decoration and things like that. And here you have this empty building, no chairs or barely any chairs. And it's almost like, what do you do here, right? And yet that emptiness is something that was, in a sense, fulfilling for many people, because they would walk in and they would express that. It's like, you know what, all of the busyness out in the outside world, I feel like it's all just gone. It just dissipated, okay? People were coming there with a certain level of sorrow. People were in tears. Like these people that had passed away, how could this have happened in our country? And what you find is that, like I mentioned, many people accepted Islam. Now, while we were there, and as we were speaking to people, and I'll tell you about some of those conversations, inshallah, while we were there was another group that was visiting, answering the same call, you can say. And they perhaps came with a certain view of da'wah as you see it on YouTube today, where it's like we got to go in fast and quick, give them the haqq, tell them about tawheed fast, and ask them to take the shahada. Now the thing is, one of the elements that was missing in that was what you might call emotional intelligence. Because when people would ask them, like, okay, so tell me about these people that passed away, their response was extremely harsh. They would say, don't worry about the people that passed away, worry about yourself, you might end up in the hellfire. What? And let me tell you, and so they would continue on. Here are some of the rational reasons why you should accept Islam. Let me tell you about the kalam, cosmological argument. Someone's coming in, they're in this emotive state, and you're now moving on to this sort of rational argument. There's just such a disconnect that group eventually, we petitioned, and even the people in the masjid petitioned for them to just leave, right? Like go somewhere else. One of the benefits that we had in the group that we were with is that we had with us a counselor. And she was very helpful. She was joining us from Australia. And even in the language that we were using, she said, just be careful, all right? When you're speaking to someone who's lost someone, don't say the victims of this a particular tragedy, okay? because that puts them in a state of victimhood, like, they're victims and so on and so forth. Rather, talk about the people that survived as survivors. It gives it a positive, intonation. It gives it a positive aspect, as opposed to a negative of, you are a victim because you lost someone. Just simple things like that that are rooted in language. So when it comes to what I wanted to speak about, when it comes to da'wah itself, we have to understand there is much more. Like Sheikh Murad just mentioned, there's a lot more than just debate. In fact, I wanted to give a type of categorization so we understand this and we've kind of conceptualized it in a way that's a little more precise. This concept of, let's say, rational disputation, of arguing the point, of trying to provide intellectual and a rational defense of your, let's say, creed, your faith, your position, it falls under a certain rubric called apologetics. Okay? Now, apologetics is not an apology. So some people might think apologetics means to apologize. That's not what it's about. It comes from, Plato's Apology, where he's speaking about defending certain positions. So what apologetics is, it is a defense of a certain creed or a certain worldview or a certain paradigm. So this is one aspect, apologetics. Then you have something known as polemics. Polemics is not defending your own creed or your own worldview. It is criticizing someone else's worldview or someone else's faith, right? And you find these terms used quite a bit amongst Christians. So you have, Christian apologetics and, Christian polemics and things like that. They're useful in terms of our conversation tonight, because what we realize is that da'wah, only a part of da'wah is related to apologetics and polemics. An important part, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you never need to argue a point, but understand that we have given it so much value, it's as if we think that that is the end-all, be-all of da'wah. And the reality, it isn't. What is the objective of da'wah? It's not a rhetorical question. So let me hear from some of you. Why do we do da'wah? What is the objective? Where are we trying to get to? Spread the message of Islam. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah. Invite. Yeah, to what? To obviously. Okay. All right. Invite. Okay. What else? Sisters, what is the objective of da'wah? Sorry? Turning knowledge? Spreading knowledge. Okay, jazakallah khair. Spreading knowledge. Okay. What else? Spreading the truth. Okay. Fulfilling our obligation. Very good. Okay. Yes, way back there. Nice and loud. To save the humanity from going to hellfire. Very good. Okay. All right, last one, right here. Following the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay. None of these are incorrect answers. All right? So yes, it's an invitation. It's calling to the truth. It's calling to, it's following the sunnah of the Prophet. All of those are under the rubric of da'wah. No doubt about it. Okay? But the objective, to put it in a very precise way, is to take a person and move him from one state to a state where that person is closer to Allah. Okay? To make it just very simple. Now that state could be that he's not close to Allah at all, he's not Muslim, or that Muslim is far away and they're having doubts about Islam. It's just, the point is to make them worshippers of Allah and better worshippers of Allah. Sometimes that happens by way of rational arguments. Most of the time, and I'm going to say this, and this might get me in some trouble, most of the time that is not the case. So at Sapiens, we run a service called Lighthouse Mentoring. All right? And Sheikh Murad was mentioning mentors. He said you guys have 40 mentors here or something like this? All right, mashallah. So this service, the target audience includes ex-Muslims, Muslims that have left Islam, Muslims that are having doubts about Islam, non-Muslims, and the fourth category is people interested in the first three categories. In other words, how do we deal with ex-Muslims, Muslims having doubts, and non-Muslims? Okay? This service has been active for the last, I want to say, 2.5 years. And just the sheer amount of data we have collected in those 2.5 years. Because we started it maybe 2 Ramadans ago. We didn't advertise it. It was like maybe what they call a soft launch. And we didn't tell too many people about it. Within 1 week of opening this particular service, right? So this is an earth service you can log onto. You have a free 1-hour session, free of charge, with one of our mentors. It was booked for 6 months straight within 1 week. Now that tells you, A, about just the demand, okay? In other words, if you wanted an appointment and you were 1 week late, you have to wait 6 months, right? And not because, there was only one guy running it. There was 4 of us, and 4 of us meaning we're putting in 10, 12, 20 hours a week at least. Some of us were full-time, 40 hours a week. And it's already booked. So the sheer amount of data that we collected is phenomenal. And I can tell you by way of the data, by way of the personal conversations that I have had, most of the time, it is not a rational issue. And most of the time, it starts with a rational issue. It starts with a question. Oh, I don't really understand this particular hadith. How could this hadith really be true if we understand in science, yada, 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 yada. Okay? If a person does not have the skill set to be able to navigate and investigate what's going on behind the scenes, they will jump into just answering the question. And that is a major faux pas. That's a major mistake. Because at the end of the day, many times, it is not a rational issue that someone is having. It is something that is much deeper than that. I'll give you an example. I had I think it was last week, there was a person that logged on. They said, look, I need you to explain to me how I can convince someone about the issues related to feminism. And the fact that Islam is not, as they perceive, a patriarchal religion. Okay? So now, one approach I could have said, I said, okay, let's deconstruct that. Feminism has some philosophical assumptions. Okay, one of those assumptions within feminism. By the way, what is feminism? Before I start blabbing on about someone help me out. What do we mean by feminism? What's feminism? Okay, everyone has their own idea of what it is. Okay, all right. Anybody else? We have a postmodernist here, Yanni. Whatever, everything goes. Okay, yeah.
I think the one concept that most people might have is advocating for equality of opportunities.
Okay, all right. Anybody else? How about some of the sisters? No definition of feminism? None? Advocating for the rights of women. Okay. Generally, when people think about feminism, it's somewhere in the area of women's rights. Correct? Okay. Now, when he asked me this, I could have now gone into, look, it's not as simple as that. Because while feminism itself as a worldview, as a paradigm, has certain philosophical assumptions. Okay? In order for you to fight for women's rights, you have to make an assumption that women have value. You have to assume that, right? Because someone could say, why should women have rights? Like if I asked you guys, why should women have rights? Because we're alive? Okay. Anybody else? We're also people. Okay. Let me take that a bit further. Why should people have rights? Why should humans have rights? And usually the response I get is not people. They say, why should men have rights? Right? And I usually say, okay, well, why should men have rights? Why should anyone have rights? And so it starts, what happens is you start to tease away at some of those philosophical foundations. Because in order to establish feminism, or let's say in the area of women's rights, you have to make an assumption. That assumption is self-ownership. Okay? So what's an example of this? When Roe versus Wade was overturned, you had people outside of Planned Parenthood with the big placards saying what? My body, my choice. All right? In Islam, is that an assumption that we agree with? Self-ownership? No, of course not. You go to any funeral, what are the words on everyone's lips? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. To Allah we belong. So our ownership is not ourselves, but it's Allah. So there are philosophical differences, and the issue arises that when, let's say, someone who, ascribes to the worldview related to feminism, how would you justify self-ownership? This becomes a bigger problem. Okay? How are we going to justify it? Are we even good owners when compared to Allah? Are we more merciful than Allah to ourselves? No. Are we more knowing than Allah? No. Are we more loving than Allah? No. If you think about it, Allah's love is absolutely pure. Even more than a mother's love, because a mother has a need to love. Allah is Al-Ghani, He has no need. So the love that comes from Allah is absolutely pure. Is there one that can be more loving than Allah, even when we compare ourselves? So what gives us the right to even be owners of ourselves in comparison to the divine? Okay? Now, that's not the point that I was going to make. What I was saying was, I could have entered into this entire conversation, but I didn't. Now you're like, okay, what was the point of all that? All right? What I wanted to find out is, where's the question coming from? And so I asked him, I said, why are you asking the question? Are you concerned about this, or is there someone that is asking you this? He said, no, someone's asking me, and they're really putting me in a corner, and I'm constantly having to defend my position. I said, who is it that's doing this, right? And, because these conversations are private, it's a one-on-one mentorship type thing, people are a little more open. So he said to me, I have two sisters, and they're the ones that are arguing with me. I said, okay. I said, tell me more about you, your background, your relationship with your sisters. He says, my sisters moved to Las Vegas, and they are both prostitutes. And proud of it. Subhanallah, man. These are, I cannot make this up. Okay? And in defending their choice to do this, they then knock Islam by saying that this is just the patriarchy and so on and so forth. So I need an argument to defeat their argument. All right, so do you really think that an argument is going to be good enough? Up to what you know so far, what do you think, in your opinion? It won't. Because guess what? You have to then ask the question, what caused them to go from, let's say, a Muslim household, they were Muslims, to now all the way to this extreme where they're now out and they're defending this as a position. And I started to investigate more, and he started saying, yeah, well, the thing is, my father, he was quite abusive. He left when I was a certain age. And so that affiliation with Islam, because my dad was Muslim, was about his abusive nature. So in this case, when you are calling someone to Islam, in this particular case, do you think that a simple syllogism will solve the problem? Of course not. This, I'm telling you, and I'm just giving you one example. There's hundreds of examples like this. Just being in the realm of winning the argument, it is not the end-all, be-all of da'wah. It has importance. But it is like Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah said, when it came to specifically rational arguments. He said that these rational arguments, yes, they have a benefit, but they are medicine for the sick and not nutrition for humanity. Not everyone needs a rational argument. Okay? So now, if that's the case, what are some of the other tools that you're supposed to use in your da'wah? And first of all, the objective. Let me just come back to that for a second. So if the objective is not winning the argument, what is it? And I can't get too deep into this because we'll be here all night, but understand that every human is created upon the fitrah. And the objective when it comes to da'wah is to bring the fitrah into a state of homeostasis, right? To use medical terminology here. To bring it to the state where it is functioning normally. And what that means is that when it's able to see the truth, it's able to recognize it. And when the fitrah gets clouded over, there are multiple ways in which you can uncloud and bring the fitrah back to its normal state. One is rational arguments, but amongst them is the Quran. And here I'm not referring to the rational arguments about the Quran. I'm referring about, let's say, even the recitation of the Quran. how it sounds. You know, we don't, just because of the environment we live in, and we have so much emphasis that we place on kind of rationality and science and so on and so forth, we sometimes discount something as simple as having someone hear the recitation of the Quran. But I can tell you now, it is extremely powerful, extremely powerful. Number two, so you have the Quranic recitation, you have the Quranic, let's say, meanings of the Quran, employing the Quran. I would say this is one of the main strategies. Why? You know, nurun ala nur. You have the nur of the human being, that fitrah, and it connects with the nur of revelation. So revelation is very profound and very impactful. Number two, certain types of experiences. When you think about, let's say, how humans interact, much of what we believe is based upon how we interact with other people. And much of what we stay believing is not a function of some sort of syllogism, it is a function about community. You know, this is something what they call social conformity. So those of you who study psychology, they've done lots of studies on what they call social conformity. All right, social conformity studies are basically how much does a person conform to the group dynamics. You don't need social psychology to really get into this, okay, to really delve into this, because all of us know your environment has an impact on you. The people around you influence you. You don't need social psychology for this. I'll give you a simple example, and maybe I gave this last time I was here. If you, like, let's say your coworkers are saying, you know what, let's go out to lunch, and you happen to really like cheesecake. Anyone like cheesecake? One person? 2, 3, all right, a few of you. Thought I'm not in Texas anymore. What's going on, man? No one likes cheesecake. All right, so a few like cheesecake. All right, so let's say your coworkers say, man, we're going out for cheesecake. We're going to Cheesecake Factory. All right, so in your mind, you've already formulated, I'm going to have the banana cream cheesecake. All right, now you fit in whatever cheesecake you like, okay? And so now it's like 9 a.m. You're already thinking about this cheesecake, and then, you know, come like 11:30, now it's like time. We're going to Cheesecake Factory. This is great. So you get to Cheesecake Factory. You've got like 20 more of your coworkers. They're all there. You know, you have your food, and now that moment arises. It comes. It's finally here. The waiter comes and says, "Can I interest you in some dessert?" Ah, music to the ears. And then he asks one of your coworkers who's sitting at the other end of the table, and that coworker says, "You know what? I'm full. I'm good." And then the second coworker says, "No, I think I'm going to pass on dessert." And then the third coworker says, "I'm full, I'm good." Until 25 coworkers pass, and all of them had said, "No, I'm good, I'm full." Are you really going to be the mujahid or the mujahida that says, "I don't care about anyone, I am having that cheesecake"? Probably not. Okay? Maybe you have that sort of just gall and you just love cheesecake that much, but most likely not. Okay? And this is a function of social conformity. And so when it comes to how do we uncloud the fitrah, part of that is the environment someone's in. Last time I was here, I spoke about the environment of beauty and natural beauty and nature itself, but even the people that are surrounding someone have a profound impact. And if that's the case, how they interact with a person and the affiliation that a person associates with Islam and Muslims. That's why an important part of da'wah, and you'll see this in every da'wah course, is the character of the da'iyah, the character of the caller. But it's a lot more profound than that, because your character can make or break a situation. Like the brothers in New Zealand who were there, it was just not effective. They didn't have that sort of emotional intelligence. So we said rational arguments are a part of it. We said the Quran is a part of it. We said your environment, experiences are a part of it, positive and negative. Certain traumatical experiences can be part of it. Spirituality, engaging in spiritual acts. You know, sometimes if a non-Muslim says, "You know what, can I pray with you?" Maybe our instinct is to say, no, like what? Why would you pray with us, man? Right? Allah's not going to accept it from you. There are certain people that came to Islam just because they participated in the salah before they were Muslim. Spiritual practices. When people say, "You know what, can we join you in fasting in Ramadan?" Don't turn them away. Say, "Yeah, let's do it." invite them to Taraweeh as well, because now you've got like, 2 for 1, the Quran, and the actual environment, yeah? And so on. So spiritual practices are a part of that. And there's others, which, again, this is not a full course on how to do da'wah and things like that, but you get the idea. Now let me kind of conclude, because I want to open up for Q&A and give you guys the opportunity to kind of ask some questions if you have some. Let's go back to New Zealand, and we'll conclude with that. One of the mashayikh that was there with us, he was coming from Australia, but he was originally from Fiji. And we were engaged with people all day, and so I'm speaking to a group of people, Imam Omar's speaking to a group of people, and all of a sudden, this gentleman, this Shaykh, and we know him well, alhamdulillah, we see him rush into, so there's like a corridor of the masjid where the shooter had actually come in from. That corridor, it leads outside, and then you have the musalla area, okay? So we see this Shaykh, he comes in, races in, and falls into the sajda. And he is crying and crying and crying, and we're just scratching our heads. Like, what is going on? Like, what happened? So after he gets done, we calm him down and everything. We're like, Shaykh, what happened? He said, well, there's a sister and she took shahada. Now we were kind of scratching our heads because we had seen lots of people just now take shahada. Like, what's the deal? Like, why is this? And he himself saw like few people take shahada. It wasn't like, yeah, it's emotional, but this is something else. So he says that, he goes, this sister, she walked in, some of the other sisters were making dawah, giving her dawah, and she accepted Islam. And I happened to talk to the sister, and I said, sister, where are you from? And she said, I'm from Fiji. He said, where in Fiji? Now remember, this brother is from where originally? Fiji. Where in Fiji? He said, such and such place. Okay, in this particular place, was there somewhere that you lived particularly in this, let's say, town? In such and such place, that's where I'm from. And then he said, what's your father's name? And she said, it's such and such. And that was his father. He had met up with his long-lost sister. When he was young, his dad, he had multiple marriages, he had walked out. His mother's the one that raised him, took him to Australia. He eventually went to Medina, studied there. But now, he's at Christchurch, and he meets his sister that he didn't even know he had. On the day she takes her shahada. It was so powerful and overwhelming, but it was just something that I'm never going to forget, right? In those moments and those experiences. So coming back to, moments, experiences in dawah in general, what I wanted to kind of have you guys leave with, at very least, is to understand that dawah has an element of rationality and argumentation and disputation. We're not saying it doesn't, but it has its place. Don't discount all of the other tools that you have that Allah has given us. The very masjid you have, the space that you occupy, the space that you inhabit every day is extremely powerful, more than you actually realize. It can bring out some of the best of people. One last thing I'll mention before I conclude. I actually went back the next year. And when I went back with my wife. And the year before that, when I was there, right after the shootings, there was a sister who had lost her husband. And she had lost her husband, but she was there every single day making dawah, like from morning till evening. And she had just lost her husband. And mind you, these are not easy scenarios, because there were a lot of parents there, like they had a high school, and in the high school, the parents would pick up their children and drop them for Jum'ah. So imagine the parents who now pick up their children to bring them to Jum'ah, and that is the last time they see them. I mean, it was like a crucible emotionally. So this sister lost her husband, but she was just extremely active. Everyone else they were in a state of grief, but this sister was just on the ball, like just day in, day out. She outworked all of us, and we were coming from abroad, and we weren't dealing with the trauma that she was dealing with. So the next year, I'd asked my wife, I'm like, when we meet that sister, inshallah we will, ask her, why was she so motivated? Why was she so motivated to call people to Islam? And so my wife asked her, and she said, you know, the day that I lost many friends and I lost my husband, I realized something. Something came to me. She said that what came to me was that Allah had chosen all of them for Shahada. And He didn't choose me. He favored them and He didn't favor me. And so clearly I must have been doing something wrong. I must be sinful. And to make up for that, I had to go and call people to Islam. SubhanAllah, man. I mean, what a way to understand the scenario and deal with the scenario, right? You are dealing with human beings that are not just rational robots. They are psycho, spiritual, emotive beings that are extremely complex. So don't let da'wah just be analytical arguments to win the argument. Let it be that you're reaching out to another human being because you want goodness for that human being and you want Jannah for that human being. Okay, so I'll stop there. We'll open up for some Q&A, inshallah. If you don't have any questions, we can call it a night. So, it's way back there. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa alaikum. Sure. 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 Right. Did you give them cookies? Okay. The cookies is muhim. Awi. Okay. Okay, so look. Now this gets into another kind of area of da'wah, but when you are approaching your neighbors, try to link some of the things that you're doing with Islam. That's very important, right? So I was joking about, I was saying cookies, but you can even link cookies to Islam, right? Mentioning something like, these cookies, they are brought to you by Islam, right? Not to oversimplify it. And then maybe mention something about the rights of neighbors, that this comes from the Prophet ﷺ, and we believe him to be a prophet. He's our moral compass, how we understand things. One of the main motivations of why, I'm coming out and reaching out to you is because of the Prophet ﷺ. And do you know much about him? No, I don't. Okay, well, let me tell you about him. Right? And that's not really abrasive. You're not coming off and be like, look, let me tell you the haqq. Right? Now that you have my cookie, khalas, you enjoyed that cookie? Here it comes. Right? You don't have to do that. But again, someone asked me a question, at the other masjid that I was at, and they said that, how it was very similar to your question. How do I start the conversation? And a lot of times what happens is that you start the conversation by starting the conversation, and you'll make mistakes, but you get better with experience. And I told them, it's a lot like, and I think Sheikh Kamal al-Makki mentions this, he says it's a lot like swimming. Like when you jump in the pool, the water's really cold, but eventually you get used to it. And these things come a little more natural, right? Now, the fact that I can use cookies and link it to the Prophet ﷺ or whatever, for me, maybe just, having 20 years of experience in this area, okay, but you've got to get started somewhere. So you may make mistakes in the process, but at least give it a shot, right? As long as you have those other things in place, the characters in place, reaching out to your neighbors is in place, try to make that link, and Allah knows best. So, any questions from the sisters? No questions on feminism? Okay. All right, yes.
Sometimes it's very easy to dawah to Christians because most of the things are related, similar.
Sure.
The most difficult part for me is to give dawah to the Hindus.
Hindus? Okay.
Break the ice. Then what's the best easy way how we do it?
So, I'll be honest, I've limited experience with Hindus, right? I've limited experience with Hindus, okay? So,
I find that's most difficult.
And you might be right, but generally I think kind of going back to kind of core principles, right? So if you think about Hinduism and some of their assumptions, like what are some of the assumptions that they may come to you? They may say like, look, Allah accepts all religions. Let's say, I'm just saying, right? So maybe they have this perennial sort of understanding of, all paths lead to God. So why are you so worried about Islam, right? Maybe. One of the things that actually in this course that we just did, we teach is the conceptualization. Now this might get a bit technical, so just stay with me for a second. The conceptualization of Islam as a religion is a bit problematic. Okay, and I'll tell you why. So in the last section, or where I'm coming from, there's a thesis that I presented, and I said I would argue that Islam is not a religion. And you might say, like, what do you mean it's not a religion, right? And when I say it's not a religion, I don't mean that in some sort of black and white, clear way. What I mean is, when people hear the word religion, there's a certain perception of what religion is. All right? There's certain assumptions. So religion is private. It has a domain. You can have religion and non-religion. Okay? It doesn't get involved in things like, let's say, politics. You can separate religion from your life. All of these assumptions are part of the concept of religion. When you take Islam and you try to fit it into that box, it's actually a bit of a problem. In fact, when you think about the term deen itself, deen doesn't fit into that box either. Okay? So when let's say if a Hindu was to say all religions lead to God, you would say, hold on a second, what do you mean by religion? Because Islam, to me, in a sense it's a religion, but perhaps a better understanding of Islam is that it is a worldview. How I view reality. And how I view reality is going to differ than another person, right? So instead of talking about religions, let's move to say, how do you view reality? And then you can get into things like, okay, what exists? What we call ontology. How do we know truth? What we call epistemology. What is the purpose? Because every single person has a worldview. There's no one that can transcend their world. So worldview is basically the lenses by which you look at reality. And Hindus have a lens by which they look at reality. Okay? So therefore, you move the discussion from one of religions all being acceptable, and therefore that is the ethic, that is the moral, to saying before we get to the moral, let's get to the source of the moral. In other words, what is part of your worldview? What do you believe exists? How do you know that? That's what we call epistemology. What is purpose, meaning in life? Why are we here? Basically, it's to focus on existential questions about our existence. Every worldview, and some, even atheists, have in some form or fashion, have to either answer these questions or put them in a box called unsolved problems and put it away. But it doesn't make it go away. And Hindus are in the same category. They have to have some sort of answer for that. And when you get to that, it actually helps you to get to Tawheed a lot quicker. Because you're talking about foundational questions about why they exist, how they got here, and what happens when they die. So Allah knows best. I would think that would be a relatively good way. Yeah, again, you want to be careful, right? You don't be too abrasive. I had a friend of mine once, and he was like, he had a Hindu roommate or something, and he made like a steak, and he goes, man, this is your God, ain't it? Tastes good. And I was like, dude, Faisal, come on, man, that's so messed up, right? Anyhow, yes, we had a question on this end. Yes.
So my question is, from a youth's perspective, how are we supposed to give dawah to our friends that are the same age as us?
Sure.
Like the people that we go to school with, the people that we grew up with, they've seen our flaws as we've grown up.
Sure.
So how do we give them dawah without breaking our relationship?
Okay. So first of all, we have to understand that character goes a long way. So I think that goes without saying. At least in this community, I'm thinking that's pretty self-evident, right? Almost self-evident. And then when it comes to kind of how do you call them to Islam, encourage them, invite them to be involved in your life as a Muslim, right? And again, you could move, let's say, whatever conversation you're having to questions about existence. Have you ever thought about like why we're here? Like what gives life meaning? Like is it just meaningless? And present it as questions, right? And those are very human questions. Like why do we exist? What does it all mean? Is it all just meaningless? Right? I can't tell you, we have very straight answers for that. And that's why for us, it's not like some sort of overwhelming question. Like, what's the purpose of life? Right, it's pretty clear. Okay, so worship Allah, move along, right? Khalas, we're going to move along now. The people that have not been exposed to Islam, that is a question that is overwhelming for them. Because, they don't have access to it. And if you don't have access to it, if someone brings it up, you might even be excited. Like, so what does it all mean? So, just like I was mentioning earlier, try to find a way to get to those deeper existential questions. Obviously, without being abrasive, without, maintaining that character, but then kind of teasing those things out and saying, talking about your personal experiences. Man, we just came from the masjid, we just attended a janazah, the funeral prayer. It was really, it was heart-wrenching because I knew the mother and so on and so forth. And I had to console her by mentioning that, that she died on a Friday, and that's a sign of a good end, for us as Muslims, because we believe in paradise and we believe X, Y, and Z, right? So, use your personal life and your experiences as a Muslim to open some of those doors, inshallah. Allah knows best. Any other questions? Yes? Sorry, could you repeat that? Yeah. Yeah. How? So I'm going to refer you to the last time I was here, which is we did a talk on beauty. Okay, and then how is beauty perceived and how do we understand the concept of beauty? And beauty has an ocular reality. You see something beautiful, you turn towards it because of a pleasure you feel. But there's also auditory beauty. And this has to do with things like rhetoric. So last time I was here, I mentioned that rhetorical devices, we appreciate those things, not because necessarily of content, because of how they're formulated. So I think the last time I was here, I gave the example of Bond, James Bond, right? For those of you who were here, I don't know if you remember. And they said that this is the most, this is one of the most emblematic phrases in all of cinematic history. Why? I mean, the guy's just telling you his name. He could have said first name James, last name Bond, right? Or I am James Bond. Why is it that there's some sort of panache when he says Bond, James Bond? It sounds good. Why? Well, because it is a rhetorical device that's called a diacope, which is in the form A, B, A. And you hear a lot of things like that. So burn, baby, burn. Home, sweet home. It's a particular rhetorical device. It's not about the information, it's about how it sounds. And the fact that there's a pleasure component that you appreciate, which may not be directly linked to the meaning. Okay? And there's an attraction there. So therefore, we understand that if that's true with something like the English language, it's true with all languages, they have rhetoric or like rhetorical devices, how much more so with kalam Allah, with the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So yeah, I would say that even exposure to the Quran is good. It has its own effect, right? Okay. So can I get one from here and then come back to you? Okay, yes.
Yeah. So brother, at high level you mentioned about how you should do Dawah.
Sure.
And what you should do.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what you should not do when you do Dawah?
What you should not do. I think, that's almost intuitive, right? Like I mentioned some of the brothers who were there. I mean, you want to not be abrasive. Let's just put it that way, right? And that's a normal human reality, right? If you are going to be abrasive and let's say rude or very kind of direct, and that's something that's going to turn people off from the message itself, right? So the first thing is kind of make sure you check your own character. Be aware of yourself. And sometimes, people can be in a state of impatience and you can end up being rude, right? Someone cuts you off in traffic, you're like, whoa, but you are a reflection of Islam when you're doing that, right? Like I used to have a friend, and every time he got pulled over, he'd roll down his window and the cop would be like, oh, so you're going really fast, huh? And he would be like, yeah, man, I'm really sorry. By the way, I'm Hindu, right? Because he didn't want to give Islam a bad reputation. Now, I'm not saying you do that. Obviously, that was totally wrong. But you understand the idea is, understand that you are an ambassador of this deen, whether you like it or not. So you have to be aware of yourself. So character, first and foremost, is one thing you have to be really cognizant of. As far as other things, the type of speech that you have, words that you choose, and a lot of that's going to come by way of practice. One of the issues is that very few of us, I shouldn't really say very few of us, many of us don't have practice in actually speaking to non-Muslims about Islam. And forget that, even like ex-Muslims or other Muslims, it's just not something that we engage in on a daily basis. I mean, we're busy. We've got stuff to do, people to meet, bills to pay. So okay, fair enough. But that means we need to take a little bit more of a proactive approach then, right? Because you have a whole population of people that are walking around in the dark. And you have a group of people that the angels, when they see them in this masjid, they see light. But what does it mean when that light is not being shown out to the rest of humanity? Now, I'm just saying, just throwing it out there, all right? So, I think that was a bit of a long answer to what you asked, but anyway, so, make sense? Yeah? Okay. Yes, sister. The Dawah company? Oh, Lighthouse Mentoring. So, no problem, inshallah. Dawah, no, it's good. Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for it was very informative.
Fine.
But Sheikh, as I convert myself, the Quran says, whoever Allah guides, no one could misguide this person.
Sure.
And whoever Allah misguides, no one could guide him.
So,
So is there really a correct way or a wrong way to give dawah? Because the end point is, inshallah, for instance, you maybe become Muslim when you give dawah.
sure.
So, but this statement from the Quran,
Yeah.
that I just said,
Yep.
is there really a right way, a correct way, or a wrong way? Because just now you said some points
Sure.
which we shouldn't do,
Yep.
and you said some points which you think we should do.
Yep.
You even talk about the lady, the psychologist, or whatever.
Yep.
Her methods,
Sure.
and so on.
Right.
But if Allah is the one who guides the person,
Sure. So this comes into the difference of what do we mean by hidayah. So hidayah guidance is classified into, you can say, two broad categories. You have hidayatul irshad and you have hidayatul tawfiq. Hidayatul tawfiq is that internal guidance that Allah puts in the heart of a person. Okay? Hidayatul irshad is more what we call that you are guiding someone by simply telling them you should do such and such. So let me give an example. Let's say someone asked me for directions to go somewhere, okay? Now, and this might be a dated example because we all have Google Maps, but let's just pretend like the guy lost his phone or something, okay? So now I tell him, okay, you're going to go down this street, make a right, make a left, and you'll get to your destination, all right, inshallah. Now, that is a type of guidance that I'm just informing him, I'm just giving him information. Whether he takes that information and applies it himself, that is guidance from Allah. Like, I don't have any control on that. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, many times when he would be saddened by people not being guided, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, you don't guide whom you love. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ. Allah is the one who guides whom He wills. But at the same time, your objective is to convey the message, to convey, right? So we understand that there's two types of guidance. One is what we are responsible for, and the other, we don't have a responsibility. Whether the person actually converts or not, it's not in our hands. So we convey, we don't convert, to make it really simple, right? But we still have to convey. We still have the responsibility, right? And yes, there is a correct way of doing that, that is more in line with how the Prophet ﷺ did it, and there is a way that kind of deviates from that, right? Someone comes up to you and says, we should make da'wah by, doing a music concert or something. You're like, I don't think so, man, right? Like, that's not going to work, right? We're not going to do it on that route. So, Allah knows best. Any other questions from the sisters? Yeah. So that's a very broad question. What do you mean by not practicing? Does that mean like no salah or skipping out on salah? Does it mean like, okay, they stop coming to the masjid? Like what? Because that's such a broad category. Okay. So maybe the objective here is to get them to start praying. Let's just say, let's take that as an example. You've got to find out why they stopped, if they were praying at all. I mean, if they were never praying in the first place, then it's up to you to say, you know what, this is why salah is important, and so on and so forth. But let's say they stopped praying. So now it's not a simple matter. Now you have to kind of investigate, okay, what was the reason they stopped praying? What was their attachment to the salah in the first place? And I'm just using salah as an example. The point is that you have to, A, have a relationship with the person, and then you have to start to investigate what happened. What was the background, right? Was it something that your parents said to you? Was it something that, someone in the masjid, just yelled at you? Because again, you have those emotional associations, and those are really the triggers as opposed to, I don't pray because it doesn't make sense. Usually that's not the case. There's some, what they call antecedent that is back there that you have to kind of investigate and see, all right, so what's going on? Like what happened? Okay. Last question? Okay, can I let him ask because you already got a chance, so I'm going to go ahead and give it to, go ahead. Yeah.
We start off for the sake of Allah.
Right.
For the sake of Allah.
Yep.
Suddenly somehow shaitan sneaks in
Sure. Right, like you the man. Right, okay. How do you keep your dawah, or not your dawah, your ego in check when you are making dawah, right? Which is a common problem, by the way. And especially if, you're doing YouTube dawah or something like that, then that just, So one of the pieces of advice that some of my teachers gave me, they said, look, one trick of shaitan will be like, look, you're showing off, you are doing what's known as riya, you're showing off your deeds, stop doing it. But that's not the right option. Because as Qadi Iyad said, the one who gives up a deed because of riya is committing riya. Right? So that's not an option. You have to continue making dawah. But what do you do in that case is, and one piece of advice, and there's actually a number of pieces of advice, but let me just give you one, is to bolster that, augment that with many acts of worship done in private. So ask yourself, how much tahajjud am I doing? Right? And nowadays, nights are long, days are short. Good time to start, right? How much am I going out and, let's say, giving charity without anyone else knowing? Am I doing any fasts? How much am I fasting that nobody knows? And so on. So one way of dealing with that is to start doing a lot more, let's say, copious acts of worship that are done in private without leaving off the public acts that we're doing, and dawah being one of them. So Allah knows best. Okay, so I think you want the last question. Sisters, are there any more questions? No? Okay, we will let you have the last question, inshallah.
We have to have a lot of knowledge to give dawah, or anybody suppose, because we see all the people have a lot of knowledge, they have about their religion, our religion.
Sure.
They pick up the surahs from here and then.
Sure.
So is that, really you have to qualify for that, or how you guys?
So again, what I want us to do is really understand that dawah is not just intellectual arguments. Okay? Because if you categorize and you conceptualize dawah as these type of what we call apologetics, then yeah, you probably need a lot of knowledge. But dawah is much more than that. And what happens is that shaitan can come to you and say, you're not knowledgeable enough. Okay, fair enough. But now the issue is that when do you get to be knowledgeable enough? At what point do you say, now I'm knowledgeable enough and pious enough, and now I can make dawah? There's no you could keep on studying, forever, technically, and never get to the point where you think, okay, now I'm qualified. Why? Because the second you say, now I'm qualified, you've entered into another realm, which is that shaitan has now deceived you to say, you're all that in a bag of chips. You're amazing. So now you can go out and make dawah. The reality is that whatever knowledge level that you have, you can make dawah based on the knowledge you have. You at least know why you're Muslim, right? I hope. You know that Allah is worthy of worship. You know what worship is, right? And so on. Those are baseline things. And if you really think about it, take the example of Abu Bakr. In the first day he becomes Muslim, the first day he brings in what was it, depending on the narration, 5 or 7 of the 10 people promised paradise. That is some good quality da'wah. How much knowledge was there to start off with? The whole Quran was not, a very small part of the Quran was revealed. So, do you have to have, do you have to know like the Bible inside out and the Vedas inside out, and you can quote chapter this and chapter that and this and that and blah, blah, blah? No. That might even work against you in certain cases, So that being the case, don't let, let's say, a lack of knowledge be an impediment to you making da'wah. At the same time, recognize that you're not going to know all the answers. And your best friend, if you're going to take anything home tonight, your best friend is the statement, I don't know. La adri, wallahu a'lam. I don't know, Allah knows best. I can find out and come back to you, but I don't know. As they say in the UK, I don't know if they say that here, stay in your lane. Understand like what you have. If you have the knowledge to answer it, Bismillah. If not, don't go beyond what you know, right? So, okay. So that was the last question, inshallah. But I'll stick around for a little bit if you want to ask me later, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.